Deputy Speaker, and can I say what a particular pleasure it is to see you in the chair today. The great English jurist Lord Bingham famously wrote that the rule of law encompassed 8 principles. Principle 5 states that the law must afford adequate protection of human rights, and Principle 8 stipulates that the state must comply with its obligations in international law as in national law. These principles are widely revered and have gained international respect. Yet barely a week goes by when this British government doesn't bring to this House a bill which threatens to breach one or both of those principles. This bill is yet another example, and it's also another example of the government breaking its word, given the U-turn on its previous commitment to decrease the use of immigration detention. Now, for anyone who wasn't following the debate at the first stage yesterday, I would commend to them the speech of my honourable friend, the member for Cumbernauld, Kilsyth and Kirkintilloch East, which set out in a very eloquent and measured way the many problems with this bill, how it seeks, as the honourable member for Westmoreland said, to tackle a problem which doesn't exist and fails to tackle a problem which does exist. But my honourable friend also set out in some detail how, if this bill becomes law, we risk breaching both our international treaty obligations and our obligations under the European Convention of Human Rights. Yes, I will.
The Honourable Lady says that this bill seeks to address a problem that doesn't exist. So does she not think that illegal crossings in the English Channel, small boats, dinghies, overfilled with people risking their lives, would she say that that's not a problem that we should try to address?
When I say it addresses a problem which doesn't exist, one of the previous speakers talked to the country being overrun by immigrants. That's simply not the case. As I said in my intervention on the honourable gentleman earlier, yes, I do think, to use his words, innocent and vulnerable people crossing the channel with people smugglers is a problem. But I don't think the solution to that problem is to criminalise, to use his words, those innocent and vulnerable people. And that's one of the central problems of this bill. And in fact, to do so, to criminalise those innocent and vulnerable people, is potentially in breach of our international legal obligations. Madam Deputy Speaker, if this bill becomes law, we risk breaching the 1951 UN Refugee Convention, the 1961 UN Convention on the Reduction of Statelessness, the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, and the International Convention for the Safety of Life at Sea, and we also risk breaching the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child. If this bill becomes law, we also risk breaching multiple articles of the European Convention on Human Rights, to which this government assures us they're still committed. In fact, the Lord Chancellor gave evidence to the Joint Committee on Human Rights last week and was most anxious to assure us that the government are still committed to the European Convention of Human Rights. But there's not much point in being committed to it in name if you bring legislation to the House which threatens to breach it by its terms, as does the introduction of a two-tier system for refugees. That potentially breaches the right to be free from discrimination in the enjoyment of one's human rights. The changes proposed by the bill potentially undermine the right to life for those at sea. Changes to the application and appeals process for asylum seekers and provisions regarding credibility and the weight to be given to evidence risk breaching the right to a fair trial. Now, the Joint Committee on Human Rights, of which I'm a member, have already raised concerns that decision-making by the Home Office in immigration matters is not sufficiently independent or rigorous to make sure that human rights are respected. And this bill will make it worse. Madam Deputy Speaker, why would Scotland want to be part of a union where decisions like this, affecting our international standing and the perception of this state on the world stage, are forced through by a government with such scant regard for human rights and the rule of law? And it's not just this bill. This bill is one in a succession of bills that have gone through this House recently, which many independent commentators have said threaten to breach our international treaty obligations and also threaten to breach our commitment to human rights under the European Convention. In one case, the government was quite brazen about it, and the minister stood up on the bench and said this bill seeks to break international law, but only in a specific and limited way. Would that it were so with this bill. This bill is going to break international law, but not in a specific and limited way, in a number of respects, which those with more time have enumerated more eloquently than I can. Madam Deputy Speaker, this is not the way to do things. It's not right, and it's not humane. There are millions of displaced people across the world and millions of refugees. The United Kingdom cannot wash our hands of responsibility for them, particularly when at least some of the reasons for their displacement can be laid at our door and at the door of our foreign policy and our colonial past. The real mischief which this bill should seek to tackle, but doesn't, is that there are insufficient lawful routes for claiming asylum in the United Kingdom. Yes, resettlement programmes are laudable, but they're not a solution for those claiming asylum, because resettlement programmes deal with those already recognised as having a protection need. Those in need of international protection who reach the shores of the United Kingdom should not be criminalised. Madam Deputy Speaker, it's time the Home Secretary stopped playing to the gallery and did the hard work necessary to fulfil the United Kingdom's moral and legal obligations to refugees and asylum seekers. As my honourable friend for Cumbernauld, Kilsyth and Kirkintilloch East has said so eloquently, it's no point in honourable members opposite waxing lyrical about the rights of persecuted Christians and the rights of the Uyghurs to be free from Chinese atrocities if they threaten to criminalise those sort of people when they make it to our shores. Yes, I will give way.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way. She's very eloquently making the point. But for so many people who come here through an illegal route, through no choice of their own, through a set of circumstances that in often cases are beyond their control, what the message that this government sends is you are not welcome. What would she say to those who have made a life here and contributed so much that they could continue to contribute were it not for this abhorrent policy?
Well, I mean, what I would say to them, and what the Scottish Government has said to them, and what my party says to them, is that they're very welcome in Scotland. But unfortunately, at the moment, we don't have control over that aspect of policy. And until we take the steps to make sure that we do have control over that aspect of policy, we are stuck with trying to persuade this British government. We're stuck with trying to persuade this British government that their policies are wrong. I fear, Madam Deputy Speaker, that the chances of this government amending this bill in any meaningful way are absolutely zero. But I know that my constituents and many organisations, the Trade Union Congress in Edinburgh passed a motion condemning this bill just in the last few days. I know that it matters very much to my constituents and other people in Scotland that the Scottish National Party stand against the bill. As I say, I don't think our stand will work, and I continue to look forward to a future where an independent Scotland will be able to set a better example in relation to refugee policy. I'm sorry, I'm coming to an end.
Lynn Smith.